Hi, my name's Amy. I work in the activities department here at Baker, and today I'm going to be reading aloud to you a story called The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. All right, here we go. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister, Josephine, who told her, in broken sentences, hints that revealed and half-concealing. Her husband's friend Richard was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down with physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquare with new life of spring. The delicious breath of rain was in the air, and in the street below a peddler was crying in wares. The notes of a distant song, which someone was singing, reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were tweeting on the eaves. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other on the west facing of her window. She sat with her head thrown back into a cushion of the armchair, quiet, motionless, except for a sob that came to her throat and shook her, as a child who had cried itself to sleep to sob in its dreams. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now her eyes were dull, and their gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds and scents and color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching her to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with all her will, as powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free. Free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright, her pulse beat fast, and her coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalt perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion of trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that she had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. And she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe that they have the right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or cruel intention made the act seem no less crime as she looked upon it in brief a moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of possession or self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest pulse of her being? Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door, I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sakes, open the door, her sister cried from the other side. Go away, I'm not making myself ill, she replied. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be known to her. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday that she thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose the length and opened the door to her sister's importanties. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the door with a latch key. It was Bentley Mallard who entered. A little travel-stained, composed, carrying a grip-sack of an umbrella. He had been far from the scene of an accident, and did not even know that there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. But Richard was too late. When the doctors came, they said that she had passed from the heart disease, of joy, a joy that kills. That was kind of a dark story. I keep looking up all these stories, and they keep giving me short stories that are really kind of dark. Okay, that's the end of that short story, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Thanks for tuning in.